I have been shooting a lot of low light over the past couple of months, so today I thought I'd share with you some top tips that will help you get better low light footage. I'll tell you what settings to use, what lenses to use, and then at the end, I'll share with you a trick that they sometimes use in the film industry that you can do at home, and that'll just make your low light footage just look so good and just... Okay, so let's talk settings. The first thing is aperture. Now you're going to want your aperture to be as low as possible. I would recommend anything from f2.8 and under. This is going to let in as much light as possible. You're going to want to keep your ISO at its base. Now for some cameras like the Sony a7 IV for example, have something called a dual native ISO, and that means that they have two bases. Bases? Is that a word? I believe that the lower native ISO will look better than the higher native ISO, but rest assured if things do get really dark, then you should be fine. On this camera, the Sony a6700, the base ISO is 800, and that's all we get. A lot of people actually think that this camera has a dual native ISO, but it technically doesn't. However, I read an article about the Sony a6700 on a website called promoviemaker.net, and they said the a6700 doesn't claim to have dual base ISO settings, but we found a sudden drop in noise when going from ISO 2000 to 2500. I've actually tested this and it is true. If you're not sure if your camera has a dual native ISO, then it's definitely worth Googling it because you might be pleasantly surprised. Anyway, the reason that you're going to want your ISO to be at its base or at its lowest if you're shooting with S-Cinetone is because it will reduce the amount of noise in your image. Think of ISO as if you're trying to slide the brightness slider up on a dark image. The image is going to start to break down and it's going to look yucky yuck yuck. Another tip is to shoot at a higher frame rate. Now a lot of you like to shoot at 60 FPS, but for low light, I would recommend shooting at 30 or 25 FPS. This is going to let in so much more light and you're not going to need to bump up your ISO. You only really want to bump up your ISO as a last resort. Let's talk lenses. Now for shooting low light, I'd recommend any lens that can go down to f2.8 or under. A brilliant low light lens, for example, is the Sigma 16mm f1.4. This lens lets in so much light. Another lens that I have is the Sony 35mm f1.8, and these are the only two lenses that I really need for low light. I don't really need anything else. The lower the f-stop, the more light the lens will bring in. Before we get into the final tip, make sure you are subscribed to the channel. Also follow me on Instagram, links in the description. The final tip I have for you lovely people is to expose for the camera and then darken in post. I learnt this tip from the mighty Brady Bassett. I use this technique all the time in my videos. You might even class this shot right here as a low light shot. Maybe, not sure. But let me show you what this shot actually looks like without the color grade. As you can tell, it's actually quite a well lit room. Once I've added a LUT to my footage, I then create an adjustment layer and draw a rough mask around myself. I don't really need to animate the mask because I'm not moving much. Then I invert the mask and I start to darken my background, reducing the shadows and highlights. Then to get rid of that disgusting mask line, I give it a really good feather. This helps me pop from my background and it helps give my video that nice, subtle, low light feel without bringing in any noise. Now, don't go overboard with this. If you light a night scene too much, it will look odd when you bring it down in post. So I'd recommend testing it out in different environments using different lights and just have a play around with it. I don't know about you, but I learn a lot more when I'm actually doing and not so much when I'm just listening. I hope you found this video useful. I hope you found it enjoyable. Have a great rest of your day or evening, and I'll see you in the next video.